What's going on, guys? So today I'm going to be talking about a bunch of different stories, and I'm going to let everyone do the thinking for themselves. I might offer a little analysis. I try to be unbiased, but there's also information. I feel like there's a ton of misinformation out there, so I'd like to talk about some stories today. So let's talk first about the Open Technology Fund, which is actually funding from the US government as a grant that supports projects like Let's Encrypt and Tor. In fact, I got a comment the other day. Someone was asking if I was going to talk about this story, and I decided why not throw it in the video. Since I'm recording, let's talk about it. So this is a big problem, considering that several $100,000 comes from this that supports various projects like the Tor Project. And of course, a open source project is going to be much well suited if they have more funding than less funding. You can hire more developers, you can keep things more secure, you can improve on the goals of that application, and you can make it more sustainable. Otherwise, it has to rely completely on individual donations, which, in this day and age, with the current economy, it's not near as promising as having a nice grant, especially if that grant doesn't come with any strings attached. I know that's one of the concerns some people have. I've even seen some comment and say it's a good thing that they're losing this funding. I think it's a horrible thing that they're losing this funding. And of course, it looks like it has come down the line with some of the recommendations for the various cuts that are happening in the US government right now. And I'm going to be going a little deeper into that today as well. So stay tuned and watch the whole video. Make sure to share it with people, and feel free to chop up any of this video and use it as you see fit, as long as it represents the content in the original context. So this is a problem I see as one of the many cuts that I see as problematic. And of course, even Tor Project has actually written about how important the Open Technology Fund is, because it really does save internet freedom. And what do we have when we don't have projects like this, when we don't have open source that has good funding through grants and other operations that help to keep something sustainable? Well, we see abandoned projects all over GitHub and GitLab all the time. It's happening because projects just don't get the funding they need, or they may be forced to go into a more privatized type of situation, which I really hope does not happen to any of these projects, of course, because open source means transparency. Open source means you can look at the code. Even if you don't understand how it works, you should have the right to know what an application is doing on your system. And having a grant is one of the ways to secure that into the future. Now, next, let's talk about a story about a professor. I was a little worried when I first read this. I said, oh boy, now they're coming after people who are studying and, researching and things like that with privacy, cybersecurity, encryption. I saw it as a bad sign, but I will say that there's a follow-up. So we're going to get to that as well. So we go through this and we see that this particular professor, oh, look at that. Well, we can't actually read this because we've run out of our articles. So unfortunately, that's a shame. But the good news is we can actually read it over on I2P. So I haven't done an I2P video in a couple months, but I do plan to do more I2P content. I would love to cover some different plugins and things like that. So we'll be covering I2P again, but let's go ahead and take a look at this. So we can look at Wired magazine actually on I2P, so that's pretty convenient. And we can also see that they raided this professor's house who just happened to work in cybersecurity. Now, I did get to check out the follow-up here. Now, the follow-up on this guy being raided, and I thought it was a little concerning, and many professors out there, like for instance, Matthew Green, who actually works for Johns Hopkins in cryptography, he also covered this and talked about his concerns on Mastodon. So if you're not following me on Mastodon, make sure to check out falstodon.com/@RTP to follow on Mastodon. So when we scroll through, we can find out that there's a little more information in this latest follow-up. So it's not just somebody being targeted for their work in cryptography or privacy. It looks like this person actually had some other collaboration in China, which is possibly what's led up to this. Now, we don't know for sure what actually led up to this and the couple's home being raided. In fact, multiple homes, 2 different homes of the couple. But they disappeared, essentially, and it looks like there was some research they got involved in, or at least the professor here, and he was working didn't necessarily disclose in the way they had hoped, or something along those lines happened. And then also he had a job coming up for a professorship over in Singapore, so that may also relate to this. So thankfully it's not near as little evidence. I mean, it's not that this is justified. I don't think it's justified from what I can see, but maybe there's something we don't know. Now, he did work with DARPA, it looks like, and also the U.S. Army Research Office, so I'm sure they take any kind of change like that or any kind of foreign research very seriously. But it doesn't look like he was working with China or just simply collaborating, which is very common in academic fields for people to collaborate across borders. Not a big deal there. But it does make me wonder what he may have been working on that got them so serious about finding out what was in his house. So that's an interesting story. You can take a look at the Wired article for that, and you can check it out on I2P if you can't read it. Of course, though, I do recommend supporting Wired. They've been doing some great work. In fact, we're going to be looking at more stories from Wired today as well. Now, it looks like the Doge Group is trying to gift itself a $500 million building. So much for working for free. Now, it looks like it's the headquarters of an actual building they shut down themselves. So they shut down the United States Institute of Peace building, and then it looks like they're trying to take over it, according to these court filings at least. We'll have to see how that plays out. Now, next, what we have is, it looks like they're cutting tons of things, including the CDC and various grants. Just like we saw in the Tor Project story, it can be concerning when grants are cut, because a lot of times these grants just offer money with nothing in return, and that is usually the case for open source projects. They just want to support these projects with these grants, and a lot of times that can play out in various types of soft power and friendly influence around the world, considering that projects like the Tor Project, other things, of course, could be used for various types of freedom, human rights initiatives, and things that can help allies around the world. So that's not a good sign, seeing the cutting of various grants, especially those that were things like the Open Technology Fund, which is something I greatly support and think is something that has really helped build Tor Project into what it is today, along with various other freedom initiatives. So these cuts are concerning, and it is looking like one of the Doge staffers actually had his nickname leaked. Now, do you remember the Sony hacks? Well, when Sony was taken over, there was something called the Lizard Squad, which was a hacktivism group that one of the Doge members apparently was part of, according to some of the documents here. So that's an interesting background. If you're not familiar with the Lizard Squad, they were well known for various types of attacks across the internet, including various gaming ones. Now, according to this, the former attacker is no longer involved in that kind of stuff, but who really knows? Now, next, we're taking a look at the axe cutting of agencies and gutting of the government, which is basically what we've been talking about so far. And we're going to continue and talk a little more about tariffs. So the tariffs, how is that going to work? Well, the tariffs are going to be paid, of course, by the consumers. It's going to cause massive raises in pricing. Countless American companies, even the ones that manufacture in America, also use parts that are imported, various things that are imported. I see this as affecting small businesses in the biggest way, considering that small businesses aren't going to get out of it, but on the other hand, politically connected corporations will receive exemptions from certain U.S. tariffs. So it sounds like it is as they say, a quote, spoils system. So it looks like there's going to be a major advantage by major politically connected corporations where they're going to be able to get around tariffs, whereas small businesses are going to possibly have to shut down from this. So I do think these topics are very important because we're seeing a complete restructuring of the entire U.S. government. We're also seeing that they are replacing people with AI. Now that, to me, is a very serious concern because, as I've mentioned in previous videos, the biggest problem with AI, or one of the biggest problems, is it lacks human accountability. All you have to do is say it was a bug. All you have to do is say the machine did it, and no one is held responsible. As I mentioned in my Fauceton post back in January, today a perfect dictatorship will be accomplished by wrapping all tech with AI. And that is true. You can achieve a perfect dictatorship by implementing AI into governance. And I'm not suggesting that's what's happening here. I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm simply presenting information and letting people think for themselves, and I do encourage people to look further into these things. Check for yourselves. Find out if what I'm saying is true or not. And it looks like AI may possibly have a role in deciding which federal jobs are being cut. Now, it looks like even AI will be replacing contract workers at the Department of Education. So it does look like AI is being used to basically replace everyone. And also, Scott Bessent, I think his name is Scott. Yes, Scott Bessent, a billionaire who happens to be head of the U.S. Treasury, is vowing to reprivatize an economy that is brittle underneath. At least, that's the justification for cutting the majority, or at least a large percentage, of the federal government, the people that can help hold corporations accountable, the very people that have the regulations that protect the citizenry and the people from corporations and greed are being cut. Things like the CFPB, among many other things. So, as mentioned, the U.S. Treasury is shifting away from public spending, meaning that everything is becoming privatized. If you look up the definition of an oligarchy, it has a similar ring to it. Doesn't mean this is one, of course, as I know there are many blind supporters out there who won't critique anything. And I do encourage, if you support this administration, please do critique things that you see, because it is more important than ever for people to critique the very people they support in politics, because without critique from someone's own base, there will be nothing holding back what's happening. Now, you may agree with it, and you may say, well, this is going to bring back manufacturing, and maybe it will at a small amount. I don't see it bringing back enough manufacturing jobs to employ the majority of the population, however. And I do know that various interviews have also stated that these tariffs that are coming is going to be used to pay for these large tax cuts. Now, the large tax cuts could actually become a way to increase the deficit by over $4 trillion. So for those who say that this entire cutting of government, federal workers, the privatization of everything is essentially to save the deficit, to actually fix the deficit, well, then why is it that it is going to add $4 trillion to the deficit? But on the other hand, don't worry, they've already got a solution. the largest tax hike in U.S. history, which is the tariffs, which is going to raise prices by possibly 30% on a lot of different things. And you might be surprised how many things that we have on a daily basis, especially thinking of small businesses and the independence that having a small business brings that allows people to speak out in political ways. If someone is not independent, if someone is working for one of the big corporations, they have to watch what they say at all times. That is something that is essentially a boot on their neck. When you work for a private company, you're going to automatically have to worry about what your social media says. You're automatically going to have to worry about all of these things that you have to consider if your employer is not going to support what you have to say. So small businesses being independently employed, those kinds of things are what empower the people. Those are the kinds of things that we need more of, not less of. But of course, the promise is to bring back manufacturing. We'll see how it plays out, but so far it's tanking the stock market. I hope for the best. I really do. But I have a lot of concerns, and I did not plan to do political videos. But of course, it does tie in with the cutting of the Open Technology Foundation, things like that. I just think that we are at such a monumental time period in history that it is important to talk about these things, just to get it on the record. And of course, the tax cuts, of course, are going to benefit those most who make over $300,000 a year, according to various reports. So it's not going to be, they say it'll lead to higher wages, but that isn't the case if the companies decide to use those tax cuts to buy back their stock and do the other things they normally do with a tax cut. So we'll see how it plays out. Hey, I'm hoping for the best. I really am. But I think it's important to report on these things. I just don't see many people reporting on all these things as one giant story, and that's why I did the Freedom Cities video, the efficiency or oligarchy demolition team video. Make sure to check those out if you haven't yet. You can see some of the thought processes and the influences that are above the current situation, where you have people like Curtis Yarvin who talk about firing all the government employees, which he called retire all government employees, which is known as RAGE, RAGE, standing for retire all government employees. Then you also saw the privatization and also the interest in the mass surveillance. So if you take a look at what Milley has done, well, Milley also had the chainsaw. Milley has actually created a AI-based predictive police system, and I see that as being a likely future for where we're headed. Predictive policing, Minority Report, good luck. So it does look like it will be the top 0.1% of earners will get a tax cut of $314,000 under a full extension of these provisions, and it will cost $4 trillion. So that means it'll cost $4 trillion, adding $4 trillion to the deficit if it goes through. Now, jumping back, we can see that they're saying the tariffs will raise $6 trillion. I also noticed in an interview he mentioned that the tariffs would be the thing that is used to pay for the tax cuts that are mostly going to benefit the most wealthy. So do look into this for yourself. I am not telling you how to think or what to think. I am not telling you not to support this. I think if you support this, keep supporting it. I'm definitely not someone who has any judgment on anyone's political beliefs. I actually encourage everyone to watch the channel, subscribe. I don't care where you stand politically. I am friends with people of all different political backgrounds, and I'm definitely not a judgmental person. But I do think it's very important that we see the contradictions where they lay, as in saying that the whole cutting of the federal workforce, which looks like it's going to be replacing everyone with AI wherever possible, is not really going to reduce the deficit at all, unless they're able to have everyone pay $6 trillion more for everyday items basically hurting most those of lesser income, those who don't have these very special exemptions for tariffs, which only big corporations are likely to have, given that you have to be certified for it, and politically connected definitely helps. So guys, remember, the best dictatorship, the most perfect dictatorship of all, would be accomplished if we were able to integrate everything with AI. So that's what I got today for guys. I'd love it if you followed me over on Mastodon, falstodon.com/adrtp. Also follow on bmc.link/politictech for the ClearNet blog. And then also, if you are on I2P, make sure to check out the blog over there at righttoprivacy.i2p. And I will be back later with more on how to protect your security and privacy.